NATO's new strategic concept. The alliance says it's facing new challenges and has decided to adopt a fundamental shift in deterrence and defense. But will this new concept work? And will it make NATO countries safer? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Hashem Ahelbarra. Russia is the most direct and significant threat to peace and security in the Western world. That's NATO's latest security assessment of Moscow. It was disclosed during a crucial summit in Madrid. The alliance's members endorsed a more aggressive stance than the last time they agreed on strategy in 2010. More troops, more funding, and more support for each other. Russia accused NATO of acting with imperial ambitions and using Ukraine to assert its power. NATO says it's facing a more dangerous and competitive world as it presented its strategy at the summit. The alliance promised more troops in Europe and declared an unshakable long-term commitment to Ukraine. As part of that, President Joe Biden announced a permanent US Army base in Poland and additional land, air and sea deployments across Europe. The US will also send 2 more F-35 fighter jet squadrons to the UK. Sweden and Finland were invited to join NATO during the summit, marking a historic shift in European security. And NATO said it continues to view its nuclear arsenal as a deterrent only while reiterating its commitment to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. For the first time, NATO leaders voiced concern about the threat they see China posing in the future.
China is substantially building up its military forces, including nuclear weapons, bullying its neighbors and threatening Taiwan. Investing heavily in critical infrastructure, including in allied countries, monitoring and controlling its own citizens through advanced technology, and spreading Russian lies and disinformation. China is not our adversary, but we must be clear-eyed about the serious challenges it represents.
Russia's President Vladimir Putin says he is not opposed to Finland and Sweden joining NATO, but he warned Moscow would respond to any deployments in countries that could pose a threat.
There's nothing that might concern us in terms of Finland and Sweden becoming NATO members. If they want to, please go ahead. But they should clearly understand that they didn't face any threats before this. Now, if NATO troops and infrastructure are deployed, we will be compelled to respond in kind and create the same threats to the territory that is now creating threats for us. It's obvious. What, they don't understand that? Everything was going fine between us, but now there will be tensions. This is obvious and inevitable. I repeat, if they pose a threat to us.
Let's bring in our guests in Moscow. Vladimir Sotnikov, director at Russia East-West Center for Strategic Studies and Analysis. In Brussels, Theresa Fallon is director at the Center for Russia-Europe-Asia Studies. And in Hong Kong, Andrew Leung is China Affairs Analyst and Chairman of Andrew Leung International Consultants. Welcome to the program. Vladimir, the new strategic concept embraced by NATO, does it reinforce the sentiment among the Russians that NATO remains an existential threat for their country?
Yes, by all means, actually. And that was not the Moscow choice, because NATO actually is not like it was in 2010, when there was a summit of NATO countries. And then at that time, Russia was named as a partner. So the present summit at Madrid to somehow could be called historic, because to my mind, this is an evident turn to the new Cold War. And in this Cold War, actually, the West and the NATO countries are the direct and the imminent threat to Russia's security.
Theresa, you get a sense in the new blueprint that NATO is pretty much concerned not only about Russia, but also about the potential of a Chinese military cooperation with Russia in the near future. And this explains why they are adding China as a security challenge for the alliance.
Yes, the language is systemic challenge, and I think there was a lot of negotiation among the members on exactly what type of language to use. Some European countries have big investments in China, and they don't want to see China and Russia in the same basket. But I would say that what really clinched it for many people or countries in Central and Eastern Europe especially was the February 4th document signed in Beijing in the run-up to the Olympics, where President Putin and Xi Jinping signed an agreement or a statement with many points, but one of the key points was that they both were joined together to push back on NATO. So I think that this sent a red flag to many countries. And we've seen a lot of cooperation with Russia and China. To those who have been paying attention, it's been taking place for quite a long time. There have been 3 recent documents in the last few years that they signed together. Plus, we've seen Russia-China naval operations or exercises in the Mediterranean, in the Baltics. So they've been cooperating and sending signals to Europe.
Okay, Andrew, I mean, the alliance has been saying unequivocally that they consider China's global ambitions as a threat to the international liberal architecture. How is this reverberating across China?
Well, this is, of course, nothing new as far as the United States 360-degree confrontation with China is concerned, because we saw it starting with the trade war under Trump, and then intensified under President Biden, technology war, the South China Sea, and so on and so forth. But then at the back of it all, in fact, the near-peer competitor, in other words, a country with near-peer capabilities in economics and in the military, in geopolitics, is not Russia. It's in fact China. And then many think tanks in the United States and the Biden administration have said so. So the United States would rather get the war on Ukraine over with, of course, on their terms, and then concentrate all they have to confront China, because China is now seen as an existential threat to American hegemony. For example, in the South China Sea, I mean, you have reported that China is building up its capabilities, which can create a fake company for the United States before even the United States have time to muscle enough response. And of course, China's connectivity, the greatest strength, it is global connectivity. 130 countries around the world have China as the largest trading partner, compared with only 57 for the United States. And then in the G7, the United States-led coalition is introducing this G7, so-called G7 global infrastructural projects. But then it's starting a little bit too little too late.
All right. Vladimir, the war in Ukraine has changed dynamics in the region to the point where we're talking now about geopolitical realignments. President Biden is saying that the US is going to have permanent US army base in Poland. I assume this would be a nightmare scenario for Russia.
Well, actually, I would like to say that this wouldn't be, to my mind, at my best knowledge, the nightmare scenario, because yes, you're right, Hasha, that dynamics has changed. But that because this is a conflict, this is a military conflict, actually, basically. And the ground realities are not just like in the military books in General Academy of Military Services. So I think that Russia is ready for that. And what is more important, actually, that whatever the outcome of this Russia-Ukrainian conflict could be, I think I'm not sure that in this Cold War, which is going right after the summit, and which is going and then which will be prolonged after the finishing of the Russia-Ukrainian armed conflict, that in these new realities, in this new Cold War, I'm not sure that the West will be the victorious side. Not just like in post-Soviet Union when the Gorbachev declared his perestroika.
All right. Theresa, if Sweden and Finland join NATO, then the alliance will have a 1,300-kilometer border with Russia. This could in itself be the beginning of an era of a seismic geopolitical shift that would see Russia grappling with the presence of Western troops just on the border, across the door.
Let me just pick up first on the previous point of my colleague who stated that this is a new Cold War. We must remember that Russia invaded Ukraine and it was an unprovoked war, and it's ongoing war. And this has been going on since 2014. So I think today with President Biden's speech at the end of the NATO summit, he stated that last year when he met with President Putin, he warned him that if he invaded Ukraine, that he would see a united West and an even bigger and stronger NATO. So that's exactly what Putin has gotten. And when you mentioned now about Sweden and Finland, we've seen a reversal of over 2 centuries worth of neutrality from Sweden. They have calculated that the situation is so dire that they need to join NATO. Finland, as you pointed out, has a long border with Russia. So they have carefully calculated and they have decided that it is far better to be with NATO than to end up like Ukraine and be invaded and have the country bombed into rubble. So I think that Russia's actions have actually created exactly what President Putin didn't want. He's got a stronger NATO. He's got 32 countries now rather than 30 that somehow he must explain to his domestic audience that this special military operation has created all of this blowback on Russia. In addition, sanctions are biting in Russia. Their economy is hurting, and Europeans will never be as dependent as they are today on Russian energy. It will take some time, but over the next 2 years, they will have to further diversify, and they will no longer be as reliant on Russian energy. So this will also hurt Russia in the longer term. And finally, China can just sit back and watch a reduced and weakened Russia. This will help them very much. They have had some difficult times in their past history with Russia. So China doesn't have to do a thing. In many respects, some analysts have said maybe Xi Jinping encouraged Russia to start this war in Ukraine. And so China is actually the biggest beneficiary here, and it's carefully trying to convince everyone that it's not really supporting Russia. But as we noted earlier, these agreements have shown this. But China might be one of the biggest benefactors or beneficiaries when it comes to what happens in the future in the Arctic. This is a key area, and Russia will be diminished and weakened, and China will drive a hard bargain with Russia and may have more ability to navigate through the Arctic.
Andrew, as you know, historically speaking, for the Americans, the first step to do if you want to counter Chinese expansion is to go into the sphere of influence of China itself and stop it there. And don't you see the invitation of Australia, South Korea, Japan and New Zealand to the Alliance Summit as a message that the focus is going to be now on the Indo-Pacific region? Well,
there is a talk, of course, after the so-called Quad with India, Australia. And then that comes the recent idea of forming a G12 of democracies, including even South Korea, to contain China. Now, I think that the one has got to distinguish between the rhetoric or the narrative and the reality. Now, as far as the war on Ukraine is concerned, there is an initial Western jubilation. You can really see President Biden and his team rubbing their hands in glee at the Russia's initial kind of withdrawal and failure to achieve any progress. But now the situation is beginning to sink, the realities begin to sink in after Russia has now concentrated on Donbass and making steady gains. And then there is a fatigue setting in the West as energy prices, food prices increases, inflation fears, or even recession fears are hitting not only most of the countries in Europe, but also back home in the United States, affecting President Biden's midterm chances. So in spite of all the rhetoric, you can see that there is a lot of wishful thinking, a lot of denial, but there is no doubt that there is a game changer as far as NATO is concerned. But unfortunately, modern wars are not fought by soldiers' foot on the ground. I mean, you have hypersonic weapons, you have missiles, you have cyber warfare, and of course, Russia is a huge country. It's the world's largest landmass, the largest territory, well ahead of the United States. The second largest landmass is Canada. The United States comes third. No country in the world in history has ever conquered Russia. I mean, not even the Nazis, and earlier on, not even Napoleon.
Vladimir,
Yeah.
what would be the next step for Russia? Do you see them teaming up with the Chinese along with other countries to build some sort of a counter alliance to cope with the growing expansion of NATO eastwards?
Well, this is a good question, actually. I was thinking it to myself, and my point is that my personal impression that this is the moment, the crucial moment for Russian foreign policy, when the relationship between Russia and NATO countries, and more generally between Russia and the West, probably has deteriorated for years to come. At least the new strategic concept of NATO summit in Madrid says about the year of 2030, so at least 2030. So Russia actually is doing a lot of effort to combine strength with its partners and allies like China, because China, as my colleague from Hong Kong said, that there were a lot of documents which were adopted jointly by China and Russia, though I do not agree with her that the most beneficiary side was China, and that the Chinese leader, Xi Jinping, probably urged Vladimir Putin to start this special military operation. I do not agree with this completely. So, and another in the southern direction, this new rapidly emerging CSTO organization, which has been already existed, but now it is more strength, and the Caspian grouping, and also the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, because it combines China, India, Iran, actually with the population of more than 40% of the world. So this is good allies of Russia, and Russia will be communicating with them and will be counting on their support and will be strengthening these groupings.
Okay, Theresa, the alliance, NATO itself, has been very cautious about the need to move forward towards all the region that stretches from Romania all the way to the Baltic states, because they were pretty much concerned about triggering any incident that would unleash a massive military confrontation with Russia. But do you think that with the invasion of Ukraine, that was the red line that was drawn by the alliance? The moment it was crossed, there was no point of return?
Well, I think no one wants to see a NATO-Russia war. But the fact that there has been penetration of Swedish airspace by Russian planes, there has been some Russian drones going into Polish airspace. You know, everyone has played this down in order not to increase the threat level. But I think that what we've seen now with the new NATO security concept, that this is a huge concern, and that the only way now forward is better defense, not just deterrence, but defense. And I think that this has really demonstrated that Russia is a deep concern, that hard power is something that, you know, everyone just thought we could negotiate with them, become more energy dependent on Russia, have this kind of interdependence. I think all of this strategy, I mean, the Germans called it Wandel der Handel, or their Ostpolitik, was really focused on relations with Russia. And that has proven to be put on the ash heap of history. So I think that this idea that if we're nice to Russia, then Putin will be nice to us and everything will work out well, that's been pretty much learned that that was a huge mistake. So I think the big question now is, what is the way forward? What kind of peace can be made? I don't hear anyone even talking about that. So I think that's one of the key aspects, but also looking at the bigger geopolitical picture. No one can ignore that China will become or is something everyone needs to keep their eye on. And this also means for the Europeans, it's not just burden sharing, it's burden shifting. The US needs Europeans to spend more on their own defense so the US can focus more on the Indo-Pacific. And this is something that Europeans will find difficult because we are in an inflationary period, but security should always trump politics and economics. So I think that's the key takeaway.
I see your point. I have a few other issues to discuss with you, if you don't mind. Andrew, are we likely to see more action as far as the South and East China Seas are concerned?
Well, I think that you can see that the United States is now riding high, at least ostensibly, on the kind of ability to rally the European Union under this leadership. I mean, this has never happened before under Trump. And NATO at the time was almost moribund. But now NATO has been re-energized. But riding high on that is trying to form a global alliance of democracies against China. So there's talk about the G12 of democracies. There is also this Pacific infrastructure initiative. But then you can see that both China and Russia are starting to push back. I refer to the recent BRICS summit, with Brazil and India and South Africa trying to expand the BRICS bloc, as it were, to include Argentina and also Iran. Where, in addition to what's referred earlier as the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the various partners. So I think that we can see a growing divide between the West developed countries and the developing world, as it were. But the one very important point is that the developing world, according to the OECD, is going to account for 60% of the world's economy by the year 2030. So you can see that the balance is shifting.
Vladimir, in very few words, if you don't mind, do you see potential for reconciliation between NATO and Russia?
Yes. Despite all the horrible situation, actually, which is now has come to existence between NATO and Russia, I think there are some crucial points of mutual interest, which, to my mind, should be present in any future relations between Russia and NATO countries.
All right.
This is international terrorism, and this is non-proliferation of nuclear weapons.
Theresa, is NATO and Europe in particular ready for scaling up military force? And we know what comes along with this, which is basically great defense expenditure.
Well, I think President Macron said just a couple of years ago that NATO was brain dead. So I think that NATO has come back, and that when EU member states join NATO, it means that they're not really voting for EU strategic autonomy, that they prefer to be in NATO. So I think that, yes, this is going to cost money and it's going to have to be prioritized, but it's there. Germany has pledged 100 billion to strengthen their own military. So the 1989 peace dividend is clearly finished, and countries will have to, in Europe especially, have to spend on their own defense.
We'll have to leave it there. Theresa, Fallon, Andrew, Leung and Vladimir Sotnikov, I really appreciate your insight. Thank you. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Hashem Ahelbarra, and the entire team here in Doha. Bye for now.